All right. Welcome, everybody, to the social club at the end of this world. My name is Benjamin. This is Suzanne. Jamen Shively is traveling today, so we are taking over as the meeting host. Maybe a small meeting today. We'll see. It's going to be what it's going to be. And no particular agenda. We're open to talking about whatever you guys want to talk about. Yeah, and thanks for joining us.
I have a question which I'd like to put to this forum. Kind of pops up in different places and different people I've discussed with. The question is this. There are many people in the world who deny, we all know this, who deny that there's a problem or deny parts of this problem and so forth and so on. So the question is, if you're not a 100% environmental activist, this kind of stuff you do after your 9-to-5 job. In your spare time, on the weekend, whatever. So it becomes kind of a question of optimization. What do I mean by that? Is there any value concentrating or trying to concentrate to engage with people who don't believe that there's a problem? Or should we, many people say, I don't want to bother with those people like that. I don't have the time for that. I don't have the energy. I'd much rather, try to get together with people who do understand there's a problem and work with them. So I'm kind of wondering what you guys and girls think about this.
Yeah, that's a great conundrum. Suzanne and I struggle with this all the time, with trying to decide what to do with our time in particular. I think that in my opinion, I think there are different roles. And some people really enjoy trying to bring other people over to their side. I find it takes a lot of energy for me to do that kind of thing, and therefore I choose to do. Well, I guess I don't really know. The more that I become able to talk about these things, the more I end up engaging with other people. But it is a dilemma. Like, how do you spend your time if that particular task completely drains you? And I think
and might not be as effective as working on solutions with people that are more like-minded. Yeah.
Welcome, Adam.
Yeah.
Hello, Benjamin. Thanks for doing this.
Ehud was just posing a question about when you run up against people who are in, let's say they're in denial or unaware of the environmental situation, whether you use your energy on those people to bring them up to speed, or is your energy better spent conversing with people who are already on your level and working with them to make progress? That's kind of what we're discussing right now.
Just getting into.
Well, that's a good topic, and I do have something to say about that if you want.
Please, yeah.
Well, you don't have to, I mean, people are going to say whatever they're going to say. And I don't know. I just sent out an email last night, and for a video I've spent a couple hundred hours on probably, and I mean, it's just you just don't have to listen to people like that, and you know, I mean, because on one side you have the far right that doesn't believe it's happening at all and won't do anything. And then you have people on the other side, on the left, that believe there's nothing we can do about it at all. So the upshot is that nothing is being done because nothing can be done. You know, so it's just, it becomes really defeating when we're trying to do something about it. And there's a lot that can be done. You know, forming a platform and working on things that we can do is the way to do it. Whether we can or can't is not the object. It's the object is that we're trying the best we can. And I just think it's wrong to absolutely not try or to squelch anything that is trying, which somebody on here does. And it makes me angry.
Yeah, there's a certain level of the culture that's built into our systems that prevents us from even wanting to talk to each other about these things, right? Like we don't come together in situations that allow us to even engage in these conversations. This is in particular why I like the social club, is because we can come together and have this platform and talk about these things. But in day-to-day life, everybody's got their headphones in, they're keeping their head down, trying not to engage with each other. And
yeah, I think it's to a large degree, it's because we're being told there's nothing that can be done. And we're being told it's absolutely impossible. There's nothing we can do. So don't even try. And that's just ridiculous.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I'll add to the conversation and answer Ehud's question. And for me, it is a real serious question and issue to reckon with, because you try to advance the conversation and people automatically, or a lot of people just don't even want to respond. So for example, every year I go to a luncheon, and there's about 16 of us going back to our university days, and we get together at this Chinese restaurant. And I just replied, I said, well, just heads up, I'm got diet change, and I'll be ordering my own plate of food, because normally it's just a big communal feast. And then I said, you know, maybe some of you'll join me, and I sent a link to Dr. Rao's Climate Healers report. And I stated that 87% of our our greenhouse gas issues, climate change issues, 87% are due to industrial animal agriculture. And I thought, okay, these guys should actually be really embracing this message, because most of them actually are in pipeline construction. Anyway, mostly silence, but one person did say, well, if that's true, how come everybody's against the oil industry? And then another person said, screw off, you know, jokingly kind of thing. But yeah, people, there are a lot of people, I think, are just living in some sort of denial, right? They just don't want to engage. And that's why I come to this social club too, because this is the only place. There's nobody really in my neighborhood that I can talk to, that I've found anyway at this point in time, next door anyway, or in walking distance. And even the local climate justice group that was started up, I quickly realized that they're funded by, they got tar sands companies in the funding mix. They've got an organization called Cows and Streams. And I was criticized. They said, well, you're making a sales pitch, Miles. And they took down a blog post that I had posted very early on. And I thought, you're telling me I'm making a sales pitch? My sales pitch was...
It's the opposite of a sales pitch. It's
Yeah, I was saying, like, I respect Ralph Nader, I respect Noam Chomsky. And I think that's where they were like, okay, silence this guy. That's just one anecdote. But that was the impression I had. And I think you do have to be very careful and look at who's funding any of these NGOs. I like the social club because that's all it is to me. I don't promote this channel other than participating on a social level. And I wish Jamen and company all the best in creating a platform, that will be open and democratic, open source and everything for social interaction like this to happen, because it doesn't happen anywhere else. And anyway, enough from me.
Thank you for sharing that. Ace has said, only complete catastrophe can wake up deniers.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that we're in a stage of we are experiencing the catastrophe, and yet at the same time sticking our heads in the sand, trying to pretend like it's not happening. Or at least that's I've noticed a lot of.
Well, Ray's brought up the bell curve of the early adopters and the laggards, and I think that applies here. That there is a tipping point after which we will all be on the same page, and it's just a matter of time. And yeah, I think to play to everyone's strengths, and like the people who love debating, they can go debate the laggards, and the people who like collaborating, they can work with the early adopters to move things forward. And I also want to point out, Benjamin read Ace's comment. Jamen usually goes over the rules, so if anyone wants to raise their hand, you can write your name in the chat or pop in. Since it's still small, we can, if your area is quiet, we can also experiment going off mute. We can, I think it's kind of like a free game this week, so if there are any suggestions or yeah.
Yeah, I guess if somebody's having trouble interjecting, then put your name in the queue. Otherwise, if there's only 5 people, it seems you're able to just, jump in and chat. I was just wondering if Ehud's, what he's felt about the answers he's received so far, if he has any perspectives of his own.
Yeah, well, I kind of tend to agree. The only question that is still in my mind is, it's hard to make a decision. How much are people who deny interfering with progress? I don't know if anybody could answer that simple, quantitative answer like 60% or 35%, but if they're really impeding progress, whatever that may mean, then yes, maybe the first priority is to talk to them. If you'll be making more progress by collaborating with people who get it, then I guess you should do that. And by the way, the stories that people tell, that Mao was telling before, that you say something about it and everyone is going like that. I have similar stories, from my friends, from work. And I'm kind of amazed, like in the sense that I work for a computer company. They're pretty intelligent people You have to be quite intelligent to work in a computer company. And not only that, everything you do is based on something rational. Every little thing you do has to be backed up by some kind of evidence or some kind of something. It's not science, but it's applied science. There's a lot of logic in there. And yet, so this is a bunch of people who will not move a single step without some rational thinking behind it. And yet, when it comes to this trivial little thing that we're all going to die if we don't do something, there, everything is, thrown out the window. Then no, you don't need facts anymore. You don't need evidence anymore. You rely on conspiracy theories. There's an ever-mounting mountain of evidence, but you can deny it. I don't understand how that works, actually. This kind of thing. How can you be so intelligent in one field, your profession, and be totally unintelligent or unwilling to be intelligent in this little thing? Like, I'm not sure I get it. Anyway, I shall mute and forever hold my...
I totally agree with you, Ehud. And I'd like to add to it that statistics show that 20% of the world holds 90% of the world's wealth. And the people that are making the decisions and changing things in life and that have built this, in fact, this whole concrete jungle of a world that we live in has come from this 20%. So, and then we have all these people that are educated that are saying there's no chance whatsoever. So that's stopping us from coming together and trying. There's so many people out there that really want to try, but we don't have a place to come together and try. And that's why I hope Jamen is successful in his quest to get a platform and use RCI. And I mean, I'm trying to do the same thing. I started before, well, I started because Jamen wasn't. But I also, I think that it won't work because I think we can't, I think we have to develop a vision of the future. And I don't think we can do that if it's a world without money. I mean, if it's a world that uses money. And I think that money is essentially a poison that has affected all of us. And it affects our 20% the most because we're the closest to it and we have the most of it. And we think we're the best, but that's not necessarily true at all, because we get our power from money. That's where our power comes from. If you were to put one person it's full of money and full of power up to one of the 80% that's strong inside themselves, that has an internal power, they would, the person out of the 80% would dominate. Of course, that's not necessarily true all the way around, at all, but that's generally the way it works. Thanks.
Adam, I think I brought this up last week, but I was wondering if we could get into compassionate currency versus whatever your vision is, and maybe they're really similar. And I don't know a lot about compassionate currency except for the fact that, like, our current money system is based on a scarcity and a finite amount of resources, and the compassionate currency would be based on abundance and based on a combination of population and the footprint that we're allowing ourselves. So it would incorporate acts of helping your community, helping our environment, that would earn you currency. And it's designed to incorporate all the aspects of wealth that we recognize exist, but are more overlooked in our financial currency system today. That's finite and competitive. So I guess I'm wondering what your vision, like if you have a different vision for currency, or what your vision for currency is. Yeah.
Well, if you have to have currency and try to, put that into the future, into a model for the future, how are you? I mean, you've instantaneously you've complicated life and the modeling processes so much that I don't see how they can be they could even work. And who would know? How would you even design a future if you don't know who has the money? With money, if you don't know who has the money, who's going to have the money in the future to begin with. So you would have constant argument, and designing it without worrying about money, it just automatically opens the door to allow you to do everything that you need to do. I mean, we need an 80% reduction in our carbon dioxide emissions by the end of this year. If we had the way I'm promoting is we could have that, maybe not by the end of this year now, but we could have it soon. But if we try to do it with the compassionate organizations, I mean, we've been trying to do it to, develop a way to get out of this mess through the methods of using money. We've been trying to twist it around and say, well, let's use compassionate organizations, or let's use, some other kind of currency. And it's all the same. It as the mindset that uses currency is not the mindset that will last for a long time in the universe. It will quickly destroy itself, just like we've proven. And we've been trying for at least 50 years, and money always gets in the way.
Adam, something I'd like to say to you is that I think since the last time I heard you speak, where you said to people, hey, it's not about you wanting to say, oh, we got to just stop using money. You're building a plan, a contingency plan for the day when all of a sudden all those ones and zeros in the computer, you go to the bank and it says there's nothing there. Your concept of a no money world, I think, is best sold as being a really vitally needed contingency plan, because we just don't know when the power is going to go out. And our money today is nothing but a bunch of computer digits. And these people who put all their money into cryptocurrency, I'm no expert, I don't know what I'm talking about, but if it's running on computers, again, the grid is very susceptible. There's scientists that talk about solar flare eruptions or something. There was one in the 1870s or something, and back then we didn't have a big electronic grid. But if the sun, and it could happen at any moment, burps out a massive solar flare, it just actually shuts down everything that's electronic, apparently. I'm no scientist, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but this is apparently a very real threat. So your concept is something that you would think governments and everybody would have already been, working on, because they know that these things exist. Even if a nuclear war breaks out, they just even detonate a nuclear bomb over top of a country, you can knock out all of the electronics. So, I think go for it. You're doing something that everybody should have ready to go at some point.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm trying to put out, is that when the collapse of civilization comes, that means, by definition, that means that money will be gone. Well, this is a way to make a plan for how to fix the world without money. When the money's all gone, and the system could be knocked out. So but that's the only way that humanity can connect and talk today.
And I'll just add, for anybody listening, if you want to know more about this effect of electromagnetic impulses, either solar or nuclear, Ted Koppel, a couple of years ago, was interviewed by Ralph Nader on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. And then Ted Koppel, the famous American news anchor and journalist, he's written a book on it. So if you don't believe me, maybe you believe Ted Koppel.
I just want to say hi to Anne. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. I was a few minutes late, so I'm just catching up here. It seems like we got into some pretty heavy-duty stuff right off the bat today.
Yeah. Well, at first we were kind of talking about the approaching people who are in denial about the climate crisis, and whether it's worth expending energy trying to bring them up to speed, or whether it's worth continuing to work with people who are on our page and making progress there, and what's the balance there. So we were discussing that for a little while, and then we moved on to Adam speaking about a new culture of currency, a new
no currency.
Of no currency, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring up John Francis Nobel, because he spoke at the Vegan World 2026 Summit and at the conference. Both, I'm not sure, Adam, if you're familiar with him. He is also coming up with a compassionate currency system that isn't based on scarcity. It's based on abundance.
That's what I was talking about before.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
And he's got a couple of things up on YouTube that are really interesting. And
I know you were. I guess I would like to get into whether currency can be used to change mindsets, and J.F. Nobel convinced me that it could. That if we design, and it's kind of, I think it does align with what you're saying. If we plan before the collapse, if we can plan. They almost talk about it as a game. Like, we plan this game where people get rewarded for reducing their footprint and doing things that help the environment, and that is how their bank increases. Their wealth increases through those kinds of acts. And it's service oriented, not consumer oriented. And again, it is susceptible to these electromagnetic pulses. So there are certainly issues, but I do think in terms of behavior change, currency, or the idea of currency and of different kinds of wealth that aren't just like money wealth, that can be a useful tool for this transition.
Well, I'm not. I just want to make it clear that I'm not suggesting that we enter a phase or enter a lifestyle right now of a life with no money. But what I'm saying is, we come on a platform, and if if we design a future without money, that we do our design of the future that has no money in it, then we can answer a lot of the questions, practically all of them. We can figure it out, because money complicates everything so much that we can't come up with the answers. Then, because when the collapse of civilization comes, there's not going to be any money. And if we don't have a plan for that situation, then we're gone. But if we have a plan, then we can do something. But that's also not what we all want. Nobody wants the collapse of civilization. So what we should be doing instead is coming up with this plan. And when people's eyes open, Mother Earth is going to be opening people's eyes. And when they open, they can say, okay, we can say, okay, we have this plan. Nobody else has a plan that's going to work, because they're not going to be able to figure it out in this world of money. And when we show people this plan, then that can work. Then we can have a transition. Instead of having the collapse of civilization, we can have a transition into a new sustainable life without, while we have backup systems in place. That's what I'm trying to tell people.
I'm hearing Jamin's voice inside my head, bringing this all around to collective intelligence. This is the platform, I think, like that where money isn't involved, and we are all able to come together and kind of create this alternative future in our minds, at least just discussing it at first. And just wanted to point out that we're kind of already doing it here within this meeting, and Jamin is not here to say such things.
So I have a question, and maybe specifically for you, Adam, and maybe for anyone else. But when you begin talking about this, and I had the same reaction at the conference in Mesa, and spent a little bit of time talking with JF about it, that at least for those of us of my age, where we've had decades and decades of living with the money system and always working toward getting more and keeping more, and understanding on one level how stupid it is to give anyone status or power or anything else because of the number of dollars they have, or thinking about yourself, and yet we continue to do it. So, I mean, this whole idea of a society without money, or of a completely different type of currency that isn't based on the current currency, is hard to get your head around. It's hard to get your head around. It's fascinating on the one hand, it's terrifying on another, and it's just difficult. So when you're talking to, I mean, I've been vegetarian since '92 and vegan since 2013, and an animal rights activist, and before that, a social justice activist. So I've been on the edge of society for a long time, right? I mean, I've always felt like I'm a little different than the majority. This is another big edge. Even for me, who's been on, who thinks of myself as being on the edge, maybe I'm not, haven't been. But how do you talk to people? I mean, it is so difficult to talk to people about climate change coming from animal agriculture, and that not hurting animals is a much bigger deal than being a bleeding heart for animals, right? I mean, like the concept that not hurting animals is about saving the planet. And it has a lot to do with social justice issues, and it has a lot to do with climate change, and it's so difficult. So how do you start this conversation do you start this conversation with people in, I don't know, a church, a community meeting, whatever? How do you begin the conversation?
Well, I don't know, but how to begin it. I mean, I wish I was a professor or something, but we can't, we can't make, and we grow up learning how to survive in this world of money. Our 20% is indoctrinated into this world of money, and we don't know, we never think of living another way. So the concept is very foreign to us, but it wouldn't be as foreign to the 80%, because it hasn't been but a generation or two that they've been living off the land. But most of our generations haven't lived off the land for quite a while. And we're the ones that are making the decisions. We're the ones with the power. So I think the platform is a way to come together, and RCI, it can be used on the platform to help us. So what do we do on the platform? Well, if you want to go into developing currencies and different types of currencies and stuff like that, that's one way to go. But what I'm suggesting is that we develop a vision or a plan. We do detailed plans for what to do when the collapse of civilization comes. For how we use the AI and the RCI technology to come up with these plans, to answer the questions we don't have answers to yet. And we put together a big plan in the digital world, and we don't affect the real world while we're doing it. And then when the time of collapse comes, we'll be ready, because we'll have disseminated these plans all over the world, and then people will know what to do, how to organize, how to turn on the generators, how to get things going again, and how to reconnect to the platform, and how to have transition into this new sustainable life.
I'd like to just chime in, just quickly add, and you're doing that right now, Adam. You've got your own channel, you've got your Zoom account, and you're inviting people to join you. And just last night, I caught a recording of Jamen speaking specifically to solar radiation management with Evan and Nolan and somebody else. So what I just wanted to say is this social club gathering, the way I see it, is a potpourri, a mix of people just getting together and kicking around a bunch of different ideas. But we do need to create our own channels, and hopefully Jamen and company will get their platform going and do the necessary, what does he call it, transcription and tagging, and get these benevolent bots going. Because as much as I appreciate what you're doing, my heart is actually elsewhere. It's with you in a part of me, but it's also with the vegan people, but it's also my own particular context has something I'm working on. And I just don't think that it's this general venue is for me to go into great detail. I can just share a little bit about it. I have in the past, but I'm my context and my what is called salience landscape. What is salient to me is in a context of where I live, and it very much relates to reaching out and becoming friends and neighbors and appreciative of First Nations or Indigenous people and their worldview. So, I could go on. I've got like piles of books over there about the subject. I've got binders of notes over here on the shelf. And I need to, as I was saying at the start before we were recording, I need to really focus, right? And then eventually come on here and say, okay, I've got something cooking, so that maybe there's a channel of people or people out there that would like to join a channel. So that's how I see this particular social club.
So Adam, this is Anne. I think you answered a different question for me. That's really, really cool. So you're talking about the 20% of us in the world who have been indoctrinated into this system of money and believing we have to have it in all of that, which is also true for a number of other subjects, but thinking about this one in particular, and that 80% of the people in the world have not been indoctrinated in the same way. And you have to forgive me because I am completely non-religious, but this reminds me of the saying, the meek shall inherit the earth. So the truth of the matter is the 80% of the people that were not indoctrinated are going to be able to survive the loss of money much easier than the 20% of us that are so deeply indoctrinated. And so it's just, for me, what I heard, which is not necessarily what you said, but what I heard is that those of us who have been indoctrinated can either open our minds and hearts and souls to the reality that the rest of the world population, human population, and all of the animal population has always lived in, and try and figure out how to make that work. Or we can just go away, and really, that would be okay. So we don't really have to try to convince people of this. Nature is going to take care of it one way or another. That's my 2 cents. Anyway, thank you very much for that.
And I like that point, except the fact that as nature takes care of it, the people being affected, it's a disproportionate effect. It's not hitting, only the 20% of us that are indoctrinated, and leaving the people that aren't. But I do like the point that you made too.
Yeah, you're right about that. And we've already impacted the non-human animals at a much higher rate than any of the humans. And so, right. No, I get that. It's much more complex than I just made it sound like. But yeah.
So we've only had one army on the battlefield, essentially, and that's been the environmental movement for like 50 years. And now Jamen wants to bring on RCI, and I think that's great, and I want to, and I encourage that. The only difference that I have is that I see it being working as developing this vision for the future, this contingency plan set that we can put into action when the time comes that we need it. Because I don't think that, and this is a way of not putting another army on the field. Because what we've been doing so far hasn't worked.
And I think, eventually what will happen with this platform of Radish is that your channel and my channel and Anne's channel, Benjamin and Ehud, even though we may all be talking about what seems on the surface to be significantly different topics, we're going to see there's a common thread. And we'll actually find that we might start out as silos, but we'll be all connecting with each other in very short order, because there'll be a whole bunch of stuff like that's probably on your charts behind you right now that I could say, wow, I could you incorporate that if you'd allow me, and you might see something over from what Ehud's up to and say, yeah, I want to incorporate that. And because I think, I am a believer in a in a singularity of truth, like a spirit of truth that's ultimately out there. I think that's our purpose. And I was thinking about how, even if anything, all we do does come to naught, that, the ship does go down, at least those of us who are like on the social club here can say we at least identified the problem. Even though we couldn't solve it, we could at least leave in the archaeological record that, well, we got pretty close to the solution, and had something to do with what Adam Soul was talking about, and had something to do with what Miles was talking about, and Benjamin and Suzanne and Ehud and everybody else is here, Anne and Eastona. So, there's something noble just in this pursuit of getting to the truth. And that's where I know Jamen has sometimes said, well, we could argue about who's to blame until the cows come home, but we got to get on to solar radiation management. Well, my perspective, though, is no, actually, I think we need to really drill into what is the problem, the ultimate root cause of everything that's gone wrong. Not that we are going to condemn people. I think we have to think very carefully. We might condemn corporations because they're not people, right? I think you can call out a corporation for being evil because you're not actually insulting a human being. But to say somebody's evil, I think is something you don't want to do. I've been really thinking that concept. But anyway, ultimately, I think if we got going, working on issues that we think are most important, we'll all link up very quickly.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We're not. It's not about me thinking of all these ways. I mean, I think we should all come together on this platform and put in, and veganism should be part of it. Soil reconstruction should be part of it. Removing carbon from the atmosphere. There's a whole lot of things that we can do. We can come up with an endless supply of clean energy. There's a lot of things we can do if money is out of the way. Now, we cannot get money out of the way. And I'm not trying to make us get money out of the way, except for we can do it in the digital world. We can design the future, these contingency plans, if we don't have to put money in the design.
Well, and you definitely, for me, put money into my salience landscape, into my thinking. Prior to that is like money is just a given, and to say we need to have a world without money just was like, what? But over time, I start thinking, okay, what is money? Where does it come from? And then start listening to other people. They're talking about money. And the current system is as somebody says, we're living in a global casino insane asylum. And the monetary system, the way it works is if I put $1,000 into my bank account, the banks now get to print. They're the ones that make money, print money. They get to, in their computer, multiply that by 20 times. So $1,000 goes into a typical bank. That bank is $20,000. And I'm thinking, well, this is explaining why there's all this construction of apartment buildings around here, even in a depressed economy, because they don't know what to do with the money. And there are cities that are empty with high-rise office and condominium towers. And what that is doing is just exacerbating the climate change because of the amount of global greenhouse emissions used to create that concrete. And so anyway, you put money into my thinking. What is it? Is it good or bad? Oh yeah, gee, there's some real issues there. So I've learned from you. I've learned from the vegans, because veganism wasn't even on my landscape until not about a year ago, I guess, when I first encountered Dr. Rao. Now, just the other day, I'm driving south to a town where there's a Costco. And I'm looking at the cows in the field, and I'm looking at also the bales of hay in the field. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's all this hay gets grown so we can feed cows. All this soybeans and such as well, corn gets grown so we can feed cows. I was thinking, well, that land that was now growing hay, that probably 150 years ago was a huge field of aspen trees. That was a huge thick soil, you know, where the buffalo were running around pooping and trampling and creating soil. Now, for the last 150 years, it's been denuded to just keep growing this monoculture of hay. So once again, I would not have seen those hay bales as a problem until I encountered the concept of Dr. Rao and climate healers. And you know, if we could just go to a plant-based diet instead of feeding all these cows and pigs and such, all that land would very quickly be running around again. That'd be great, right? And we'd be healthier because the plant-based diet's so much healthier.
I agree, and I just want to say real quick that the collapse is coming. So if we mess around trying to fix it in the system that we're already in and trying to, trying to do what we've already done, which hasn't worked, by coming up with some kind of monetary system or something like that, I think we're just going to spin our wheels and not get anywhere, and the collapse of civilization is going to come, and we're not going to be ready. I'm saying we can be ready by everybody people coming together like Dr. Rao and others, and developing this plan for the future. And then if we have a plan ready when the collapse comes,
I don't think you should say people are spinning their wheels. I just think that you just let people do what they see is most important. And don't criticize them. Just say, well, it sort of is to me, when you're just sort of discounting that.
I'm not the best person to be saying this. I don't have the best diplomacy, and I'm not the most intelligent person in the world. I'm just telling you that we can design this if we don't use money in the design, and then we can have a plan to move into when everybody is ready to move into it. And it doesn't take that many people to get it going. It doesn't take very much to get it started, and it gives people a place to come to. I don't know, I want to come to RCI and help do that. And if the platform that I'm saying goes, then RCI would be a part of that.
Thank you, Adam, for sharing that. And I just want to welcome Ray to the meeting and read a couple of comments here real quick. Ace has said, I've always hated money. Sadly, it maintains all of civilization. The entire system would need to be changed from the bottom up. That would be a tough sell, let alone to implement. But if it means anything, I do agree with you, Adam. Money is a problem.
Oh, and Miles put the link to the TED Talk. Or is it? No, it's a book. Sorry. The book by Couple. Yeah. Also, we are experiencing some videos being frozen. How is everyone else doing?
Is everything working well for everybody?
I've had a couple of events or occasions today where it's frozen for a second or a few seconds.
You were breaking up there just that last 20 seconds or so. Did anybody?
Was Benjamin breaking up?
It didn't appear so to you, then it's probably me.
No, there was a bit of choppiness when Benjamin was talking. Yes.
Yeah, for me too. So hopefully that'll get resolved.
Yeah, we'll do our best to resolve that.
You can't. It's the deep state. They're trying to interfere with our conversations. What do you do? Just take it as a compliment that we're on the radar.
No, it's the beginning of the collapse. Everything is starting to freeze. This is it.
If only we could be that important. That would be exciting if we were that important. I wish. But I don't actually think so, Ray.
Going back to Ehud's question about, well, how do we reach people so many people seem to be in some sort of a blissful ignorance or state of denial. And, you present the concept of ecological emergency and greenhouse gases, and they sort of just look at you and don't really even respond. Maybe the solution is that if we can get this radical collective intelligence platform up and running, Jamen and company get it going, then the very fact that everybody is offering a different perspective on it, and you have all these channels starting up on RCI, there'll be something for everybody. And as I said a little earlier, that we very quickly realize, oh, gee, we're all working on the same thing, So, I connect to a community of people who are also interested in what's called Truth and Reconciliation in Canada with First Nations people, and I get a little community started, and I come on to RCI. I've just brought a whole bunch of people that were thinking about First Nations reconciliation. And now all of a sudden, oh yeah, and this all connects to the fact that we've got an existential crisis because our industrial consumption and growth society is just consuming the planet, and that the First Nations people actually lived with a much lighter footprint. For example, they knew to move their teepees every 3 days because they didn't want to kill the grass underneath their teepee. So that's intelligence. That's a higher. We may think that they might not have had the weapons that we came here with, and sold them guns and such, but it doesn't. Maybe we're the stupid ones. And my biggest fear is artificial stupidity is going to kill us, not artificial intelligence. We'll be lucky if we ever get to artificial intelligence, because there's going to be a lot of artificial stupidity before we get there. So anyway, that's something the RCI guys can think about.
Yeah, I think it's real stupidity, unfortunately. It's not artificial. But anyway, I had another point. I just forgot it. Oh, well.
Yesterday, I was trying to decide what is artificial, what is unnatural. And I think maybe the only thing that we have that's completely unnatural is money. Because, even plastic is derived from a petroleum product, which is derived from, dinosaurs or whatever died out millions of years ago. But as we assume our place amongst the animals, I think a lot of that thinking might change.
Yeah, and so I know I missed the first part of the conversation also because I was a bit late, but someone, I think it was Miles, but someone just mentioned, how do you talk to people who are living in blissful ignorance of all of the things that are going on? And I have actually changed my thinking about people living in blissful ignorance. And I no longer think that people are blissfully ignorant. That psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors say that the number one thing that they are being seen for right now is either eco anxiety or environmental anxiety or climate change anxiety. Like, people don't know what to do about it, but lots of people are losing sleep. Now, lots of people are still doing the things that some of us stopped doing years ago, like, using plastic bags to get your groceries and your produce, right? And some of us stopped that a long time ago, and we still walk into a grocery store and we're like, oh my God. But those same people that are using those plastic bags are going home and laying awake at night because they're afraid of what's coming. And either they're not hearing these simple things to do, or they think it's already too late. But I'm not sure there's a lot of people in blissful ignorance. And that is, for me, really good news. Because if people are scared or anxious or worried or whatever word that we want to use, it means that if we can give them ideas that are out there, like that are very, very clear, do this instead of that, then I think more people will begin to do those things. We just don't have very many loud, I mean, there aren't commercials about using reusable bags. There aren't billboards about doing those things, and the straw thing, why the plastic straw thing became such a big deal, it still amazes me. And I have worked for decades in the disability community, and there's this huge argument about, well, some people with disability have to have plastic straws because they can't use metal or glass or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, you have got to be kidding me. We're talking about maybe 1/20th of 1% of the humans on Earth. And besides that, there weren't plastic straws 50 years ago, and there were still people who had those kinds of disabilities before that, and we figured it out somehow. So but why would we get into an argument over that? And I think that's all the cognitive dissonance that is going on about what people see and how we live and what it is that we can do. And we find, I certainly find in my own life, I just recently switched to bar shampoos and conditioners, right? I was still using shampoo and conditioner out of a frickin' plastic bottle because I literally hadn't thought about it until a few months ago. And so there's lots of that. Like, we need to have, I think one of the things that would be helpful is if we had huge numbers of these lists going out to people, and we could figure out a way to get them, in newspapers and magazines, and not in the, Veg News magazine, but in People and whatever the masses are reading, to try and, every single little thing really does help. We need some big things too, but the little things really make a huge difference.
And
yeah, thank you for sharing that, man.
Oh,
Go ahead, Adam.
well, I was just going to say that we're trying to, we can't change. We've tried. I don't see how we can change all these things in the life that we live in now. I mean, we could change a little bit here and there, but it's not significant enough to save us. But we can come together on a platform and create a plan or a vision for how we can do it. We basically create a plan of what we could do if we could do it. And so that means we wouldn't use plastic straws. We would turn vegan. We would, all these things would be put together in one big plan. That's what we don't have. We have answers for individual things, but we don't have any way of putting it all together so that we have one big thing to point to and say, that's the life we need to go for.
Well, Adam, I feel like Anne's mentioning of let's just make a big list of all the small things we can do, that to me, I could see that evolving into what you're talking about. All those things become that is what we need to do. That is the future. So
yeah, I think,
and maybe Anne is focused on one portion of these lists, and then, you know, other people are going to be compiling the rest of the list, and eventually they all come together to make, you know, how sustainable life works.
Right. It's a cultural shift, and that's what we've been describing. It's not about straws. It's not about veganism. It's about all these things together and a new way of thinking where we actually are responsible for ourselves. And I think we were talking about the people that are asleep. They're asleep because they've been fed the line that all you do is vote, and if you vote wrong, then you get somebody who's going to make the world worse. And if you vote right, then you're going to have somebody that makes the world better. And that's the limits of our power, right? That we kind of vote and then give away our power to this notion that politics solves everything. So we've come to a place where politics doesn't solve it, that there's huge obstacles to getting the world that we need. And we need to start being the change that we want to see in the world. But so many people, as they encounter this problem, go, we don't have the leadership. We don't have the leadership. What are we ever going to do? We're done. And then they just feel despair and can't do anything.
But we've gone through some major shifts that we may not even recognize anymore. And I don't just mean technological. So my understanding, and I wasn't here, but 200 years ago, I understand there were not breakfast foods, lunch foods, and dinner foods. There was food. You ate food. And because of marketing and some people wanting to make money, they started marketing breakfast foods, and that you ate different food. And my understanding is that happened after 1900, that whole idea of separate foods for breakfast is not even 200 years old. And yet today we have a pretty strong belief that there are certain things you eat for breakfast, and then things you eat for lunch is a little bit different than the things you eat for dinner. But between breakfast and dinner, it's a pretty big stretch. And that was not done like on a whim. There were, I don't know, millions of advertisements, millions of billboards, pictures, conversations on news programs. I mean, I don't know how it was all done, but we've also, since 1900, doubled or tripled the meat consumption in the United States. That also wasn't done, just happened. It was done because massive marketing was done. And while I don't want to force people to do things that are bad for them, I'm not sure that marketing for things that are actually good for people and the planet would be a bad use of marketing technology.
And to speak specifically towards your plastic straw example, I feel like that's one of the these part of what your idea of creating like this environmentalist guidebook, which is kind of the guide to the future of how we're going to act and create a new culture, is this. It's like a it's a tiny little chunk that's digestible. We see that, and it can be marketed. So we see these pictures of fish or the sea creatures affected with specifically an image with a plastic straw in it, affecting the life. And we can immediately say something like, here's something I can physically do something about. It's really small, but and people latch onto those little things because they're all looking for something to do, and then it gives them the excuse to stop at that point. And what I really like about your idea, Anne, is to continue making that list and building those little things, and maybe even attaching some kind of marketing idea to each of the little to each of these little things we can do, to break it down into digestible chunks, kind of for people who aren't able to keep taking a step back and see the bigger picture. Just a thought.
Well, those drinking straws are a step towards being able to see the big picture. You talk about people that can latch on to this concept of straws. The bigger picture may be a bit much as a first step, but as they get into it, people will tell them straws aren't enough, and then they can, get more and more of the picture as they move along. There's a great shifting, game with moving pieces right now that has to do with all the little things matter, yet all the little things don't matter. Sometimes the one big thing matters way more than all the little things, and a bunch of people doing little things and ignoring the big thing. If that's our model going forward, then we're in big trouble. If it's all these little things that start to recondition our culture to use bar shampoo instead of a plastic bottle, those are things that are, we're starting to do things that are not for ourselves. And that's not what we've been taught. We've been taught, what is the greatest experience we could possibly have for ourselves? How do I build my perfect castle? How do I keep up with the Joneses and consume enough to keep our economy going? That's the story that's been given to us. But now we have the opportunity to say things that I do could benefit somebody else rather than myself. So straws is one way. And of course, as vegans, we're put into that little box where the mainstream climate change movement says, yeah, if everybody changed their light bulbs and changed their personal habits, that's good, but do it, absolutely, but it's not going to save the climate. And we're kind of, veganism is being lumped in with that. There's a book right now that talks about how veganism is letting the government off the hook. Or, in a sense that could be true, that if the only thing that can happen is that our society changes and the government just keeps building the economy, that is letting them off the hook. We need to keep on their case, but we need to shift. We only have a government that reflects our values. So and we got Trump. So rather in the States, you have Trump. In Canada, we have Guy Smiley, who wants to be everybody's friend. But we have to live in that space and realize that there are false justifications. There are things that we do. Straws on their own is a false justification. If that's where, as far as you go and you stop, I did my thing. It's kind of the vegetarian paradox where vegans and vegetarians have this thing between them, where vegetarians, especially people who have been vegetarian for decades, it's really hard for me as a vegan of 4 years to say to a vegetarian of 20 years that there's another step for them to do. But there's, this kind of idea of, I've given more than most, so I've given enough, right?
Whatever you're putting up on the screen is disappearing into the green screen. You're on mute, Ray.
Food choice and sustainability. Richard Oppenlander. Why buying local, eating less meat, and taking baby steps won't work. Which I agree to a large degree, and he talks a lot about false justifications. And quite often those are false justifications that are encouraged by particular industries that want you to go so far and then stop. And industry in general wants to keep growing the economy, not having limitations where we decide, it'd be a lot more efficient if we just ate the plants instead of feeding it to the animals. There's certain elements of industry that are saying, yeah, we're making a lot of money growing all this food, processing it, feeding it to the animals. We get subsidized twice, and you're going to take that away from us? Nah, let's talk rational.
The other thing people should think about is that big ag is in the hands of a lot of private hands, family hands. empires, because like the biggest industrial agricultural companies that control a huge amount of our food are held by just a few people. Like ADM is an example, I believe, of a very closely held private corporation that has very small number of owners. ADM stands for Archer Daniels Midland or something like that.
Yeah, and there's a handful of other billionaires. Lucas Oil owns a whole bunch of cattle ranches, and he also funds a group. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's basically a troll for vegans, and it's a really cutesy website with, you know, the Great American Harvest or some nonsense, and it's promoting meat eating and the use of animals, and that's, I think, wholly owned by the Lucas family. And people don't even, I mean, most of us don't even know that most of those companies, those big companies, are owned by very few people. And then, you know, the ones that are public, there's also so many people who own stock in those companies that think they have to because that's where money gets made. And so they don't want to stop it, even though they might be opposed themselves. They're worried about their own retirement accounts. And so they're still owning Monsanto and whatever stock because they're afraid. They're afraid not to. I mean, it's such a screwy system that we have. It can get very depressing if you don't hang out in groups like this, in which there are at least some ideas on some ways to take a different path.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking with our friends recently, and there have been a lot of times when we reach a point when the conversation naturally ends with I'm overwhelmed and I don't think there's anything I can do, so let's stop talking about this for now.
Right, and Benjamin, that's exactly where my idea of these lists, which sounds stupid, I need a better way to talk about this, but to constantly have these ideas, because the first time you see them, you think, it won't matter if I do this, or it won't matter because there won't be enough people who do it. But as people start to take it on, so, you know, I'm annoyed with the plastic straw thing in the disability community because of it's just so silly. On the other hand, plastic straws have made it into the international conversation, which is an entree to a much bigger conversation about plastics and about what we're doing to the earth. And so if we can find a way to keep, you know, doing something, I mean, you know, keeping those numbers around about how much water it takes to produce a hamburger versus a portobello mushroom, you know, it actually does feel like you can say those things and people might be able to hear them. I don't know, because we need to try and keep it from being overwhelming to us and to the people that we're talking to, so that they have some feeling that they have some agency to do something.
Yeah, it's good to read the room. I think there's, you know, we always have to be adaptable and realize who we're talking to and what kind of a story, what kind of an understanding of the world they have and how far you'd be able to push it. There are times when we should really tell the story as blatantly and raw as it is, and recognize there's going to be some people that are going to panic and just give up. And there's so many people that say, well, you can't tell that story because people will panic and give up. If a lot of those people are just starting, they're just hearing this for the first time, or they've ignored it and now they're starting to listen to it. we need to kind of sort people into that. I probably shared that graph before, the law of diffusion of innovation, where you have the early majority and the late majority. Compromising most people, the early majority are just waiting for something to do. They're anxious to do something. The late majority are going to wait until society changes before they change. And some people are just going to be like that. So you might get some of those people who are ready to, lead the charge by telling them the right story. And those people that might get a little bit shaken up and shut down a bit. I mean, you don't want anybody falling into depression, but sometimes people need a bit of a wake-up call before they change their priorities. And really, climate change is more important than the Kardashians, which it is. I swear it is.
So Ray, I have a very practical and very personal question. My husband and I just moved to South Florida in October, and for Thanksgiving, we actually found 3 miles from our house a vegan picnic that 200 people come to on Thanksgiving. So we're going to be with 200 vegans and vegetarians. It's actually the veggie meetup group or the Palm Beach County Vegetarian Society or something, but they're very clear. In order to be welcoming to all people, this will be vegan and raw vegan. And so I have an opportunity, like, do I tomorrow run out and print copies of the white paper, or do I just, as you were talking about knowing your audience, I have 200 people on Thursday that I will be with who are already partway here. What do I do? I should have thought of this earlier, but I've got you guys on the phone. You can help me think about this. What can I do? What story can I tell? What can I share with these 200 people?
These are raw vegans?
No, they're vegetarians and vegans who are coming together for Thanksgiving dinner. Rather than spending it just with their family, they're choosing to come together. It's an outdoor picnic because we're in South Florida. It's going to be 80 degrees. And they have, it's been going on for like 10 years. And they expect 200 people.
I was at a Thanksgiving dinner with about 200 vegans about 2 years ago. Last two years we've been spending it with family, but they're great opportunities and great. I mean, and these were all activists too. So pretty much everybody was not just vegan, but very devoted and committed vegans. And I think a few people brought non-vegan friends. I should say that there was a bit of a mixed audience, but when you mentioned that they're raw vegans, it suggests that maybe that there might be more of the health vegan crowd. Do you think that it's?
I don't know. The invitation says that it's vegan, and there'll be a separate table specifically for raw vegan. I don't know this group yet. I haven't done anything with them because, like I said, we just moved. And as we were looking for something to do, because we have no family and we don't really know people here yet for Thanksgiving down here, I found this vegetarian society that hosts this vegan picnic on Thanksgiving. So I don't know for sure.
Is there, I think that it's a great opportunity, and I would also be cautious as to how to approach it, because you don't want to scare people away. But I would think that inviting them, maybe not to have a conversation there, but to have a conversation later, or join us for a conversation,
or to send them to the Climate Healers
website.
Them
to the Climate Healers website. Yeah, Climate Healers.
Or what I could do tomorrow. It's being held at a pavilion at the County Civic Center, but I bet you that the Civic Center either rents out or loans out rooms. And I could call tomorrow and get one for a couple weeks from now and show Countdown to Year Zero and announce it on Thursday.
I love it.
And that would be a way to invite people in without having the conversation. And then I can hand out climatehealers.org,
exactly.
to go to the website. But I could call tomorrow and it would be in the same, I mean, it would be inside instead of outside, but people would know where it is. And yeah, that's okay. Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
I love it. We're actually planning on doing something similar here. We're in the process of going through the Climate Healer certification process, which involves.
How do you do that? I want to do that.
There is a guide that Jessica has posted. Where did you put it?
Oh yeah, she put it in the Vegan World 2026 main documents section. It's all the steps that you would need to take to start a group in your location.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to read a couple of comments here.
Or Adam, you can
Adam,
jump
if you
in.
want to jump in.
There has been a lot of talk about money. And I would like to maybe start with a thing. Anne mentioned that a lot of people aren't actually ignorant, that they're maybe just overwhelmed. And to Ehud's point, there are a lot of people obscuring the facts too, and a lot of those people, I think, are tied to financial reasons why they're doing that. So I think it does come back to money a lot too, and we can, I think the people that Anne was talking about, the people that aren't actually ignorant, they just don't know what to do. Those people don't have financial interest. They're, genuinely concerned. And then maybe Ehud, when you were talking about the people, like, do we focus on the people that are actually, they're obstructing our progress? They aren't just ignorant. They're like actively working against progress. I think that's where the money comes in. And then another question on money, and I know a lot of us tend to bring this back to veganism a lot, but my understanding of money and capitalism is that, the word capita is Latin for head, and head of cattle specifically, and that our first capitalists were herders who were warring for land and resources, and that kind of system of wealth and money is very closely related to our objectifying animals and commodifying them. And I guess I wonder what you think about that, Adam. Or if I've read some of your site, which you put for everyone to see in the chat, aworldwithoutmoney.org. But I have not, we have you here. So if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it's not just the word kappa, and the word stock market, stocks and bonds. Money, our first form of money was animals, because we started herding, and we used, and that, well, it all started before that, but when we started herding, animals became our first form of money, because we would trade them for slaves, mostly. And I want to point out that I'm not saying that we change the world that we live in now. I don't think that's possible. I'm saying we come together on a platform and we develop a vision for what the world can change to, if we could. And we can make that vision as long as we don't have to include money in it. Because then we'll have a way to fix the world after the collapse of civilization comes. Because then there will be a world without money anyway. And that's how then we'll be ready with a plan that can work. And hopefully people will see this before then, and we can have a transition into a new sustainable life instead of the collapse of civilization.
Thank you for sharing that. Anne wrote a comment, the origin of the word capital stunned me when I first learned it. It also stunned me. Suzanne read The World Peace Diet, and that's kind of where our foundation was formed. She read it first, and then over the course of a week kind of synthesized it for me, and just completely transformed us. And that's kind of where we learned about the origins of capital. We'll put out our emails.
I think one thing that's really changed dramatically is that people can now start talking about capitalism for the most part. But when I was younger, and Adam will agree, I'm sure, if you were to criticize or critique capitalism, people would automatically think, well, what are you, a communist? You're a pinko was a derogatory term, because there was this real worldwide Cold War going on. And the Cold War, some people say, ended when the Berlin Wall came down, but the military-industrial propaganda machine still needed to have some sort of an enemy to justify continuing to make missiles and bombers and fighter aircraft. But at least today, you're not branded a communist, generally speaking, for questioning the monetary system, because it wasn't very long ago we were brainwashed that capitalism was freedom, and that's why we're in North America and Europe were so much better, because we were capitalists, we were free, not those nasty communists, So and there was definitely nastiness and brutality in communism. They took a good word namely community, and turned it into a very negative word, communism. So there's still that issue, but at least young people especially are saying, yeah, this system's really not really that free. We're just in servitude to student loans, and fewer and fewer people holding more and more of the wealth. So that's a positive development. I'll also add something. I've got a document in front of me, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. It's not the full document, but it's a study guide. And just for everybody who's new to the channel, one of the things you might want to go back and listen to are some of the early social club meetings where Jamen and his friend Jamie Gilchrist, they were really, for a while, putting a lot of effort in reaching to the Roman Catholic Church. They're both Roman Catholic heritage, and they even had a meeting with very high-level officers of the Roman Catholic hierarchy in the city of Cleveland. They put together this fantastic wooden-covered book proposing collective intelligence linking up with the Roman Catholic Church. And it fell on basically deaf ears. And I know Dr. Rao, he reached out, or there was a young teenage girl who tried to connect with Pope Francis on the subject of veganism, and again got nowhere. And I'm just looking at their list of things to do, taking action at home. Now, this is just an abbreviated study guide, but there's 10 things to take action at home. Nothing about changing your diet to a plant-based diet. So it'll be interesting to see how the subcommittee that you have for the vegan collective intelligence related to interfaith might look at that, review that effort. Because I know I'm not Roman Catholic myself, but my children go to a Roman Catholic school. And a couple of years ago, I was at a meeting for parents along with teachers and trustees of the Catholic School Board, which is quite large here in the city of Calgary. And it was a mental health professional from the University of British Columbia. And she was making a presentation, and she was asking the audience, so, what concerns people? This was about a couple of years ago. And I chimed in, eco-anxiety. And everybody was like looking at me like, what? And then I explained ecological anxiety. This was before Greta Thunberg. So, it was a bit of a shock to people in a way, but she said, oh yeah, eco-anxiety, that's another one. But it wasn't in the list of her issues that teens are dealing with just 2 years ago. And it'd be interesting to see what her presentation looks like now. So yeah, interest to see how the interfaith committee of your vegan movement might take a look at that Laudato Si of Pope Francis. I might add, I also filled in a card at that meeting because they said if you have any other questions that you want to pose to the Catholic school district here, and I actually put down, I'd like to know what is the school district's policy with respect to including Laudato Si in the school curriculum. And curiously, I never did hear back from anybody.
Miles, could you spell that out in the chat window for us?
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks.
It's really hard to reach people, and I don't have much money, so it's just really difficult. And I got on this social club about almost 2 years ago, and it's been an outlet. And Jamin's been gracious enough to let me say stuff on here, and I really am trying to help him too, and I just want it to work. We grow up, we are pretty much all of us here are in the 20%, I imagine, and even though we might not have very much money, we might not be in the top 5% or 10%, but we're in the top 20%. And one of the things I wanted to point out about these vegan get-togethers and other kinds of get-togethers, we grow up in this world of money, and we think it's the only way to live. And so we think, but this whole civilization that is destroying the world has arisen out of this world of money. And we endorse this world of money without realizing it. I mean, we can be all for veganism and things like that, but how are you going to get to the veganism picnic? You're going to drive cars, and some people are probably going to fly in airplanes. And I'm not trying to say that you're bad or anything, because I do the same thing. But when we do these things, we endorse the world that's destroying the world. We endorse what we're doing in this 20%. And I think we should think about that.
Oh, Adam, I struggle with that all the time. When the Vegan World 2026 conference was happening. I really wanted to go, but I was going to have to fly to get there. Well, should I do that? And is there going to be more benefit to the world? You know, going back and forth with all of that is enough to drive you nuts. And,
I ended up taking the train down there and then a bus, and then
for the same reason.
For the
we were
same
going
reason.
crazy. We really wanted to go, and it's like, do we buy a plane ticket to go to a climate change conference?
Or do I take four days to get there?
And those are the options.
And
really.
yeah, those are the options.
I mean, you could stream it, but something about it just felt like we needed a representative there too.
Yeah.
That's why I say that we can do two things. Instead of meeting someplace, we can meet via like Zoom, because we have technology today that we can do that with. Other than that, we can't. I mean, just right across the board, we can't change the world that we live in now. And I think that's why people aren't talking about it, because they feel like the problem is too big for us to change. And what I'm saying is we can change it hypothetically, and by making a vision of what it would be if it could be. Because we're not going to wake up humanity. It's Mother Earth that's going to wake up humanity. And there's going to come a time when humanity is going to be ready to listen. And when I say humanity, I don't mean the 80%. They're probably already ready to wake up. It's our 20% that doesn't get it. And it's our 20%. It's our way of life that we endorse that is destroying the world.
It's a sobering thought. Not a thought, it's a sobering reality. And I'm guessing that everyone on this call has struggled with that idea many, many times. And I mean, down to the little things like how long you spend in the shower, right? And then my mind goes, well, I've been vegetarian for 27 years and I've been vegan, and so I've saved a lot of water, and so I can take the extra 5 minutes. And then I think, and how ridiculous is that, right? I mean, I think that the people here completely, I'm guessing that everybody completely gets it. And some of us do this and some of us do that, trying to mitigate it as much as possible. But it certainly is sobering. And especially, I mean, I'm 60, my husband's 66. So we were in this whole thing, most of our working lives. I mean, we're still working, but with that idea that we got to retire at some point and have a nice, easy, right, life, which of course the money never worked the way that it did for our parents. And now the idea of retiring on what? Buying an RV and driving around how you, what? Or traveling the world, or I mean, it's not possible. So, I mean, it's just such a sobering thought. I don't know. I don't always have the words.
I pasted into the chat a link to Project Drawdown. Telepresence, obviously most of the trips that happen by plane are business trips. So one of the solutions that they've suggested is telepresence, that ability to connect with people, not always flying to have face-to-face contact. It's tough because they've done enough market research and business research to know that face-to-face always has better results than telepresence. There's not much that you can do with that other than try to make telepresence as close as possible to meeting somebody in person, however that may be. So use the technology to the nth degree, and it's only the 63rd best solution ranked, measuring the carbon they create or save between now and 2050. So sometimes you got to take those things into account, that, you know, your travel is a big, huge part of your own footprint. But when it comes to going to events that you think that meeting somebody in person is going to change your life, change your decisions from that point on. I flew to Berkeley to be part of the CowCon convention when they had it there. And it was something that I referenced so many times in my activism. Yet I managed to find an event that happened in Toronto, and I went to that one. And in that case, I was spending more of my own personal money to attend the event, but it was also worth it, and I didn't have to travel. So trying to find the best of both worlds is important. There's also something to be said for resisting the temptation to fly and fly and fly and fly someplace, fly back the next day. Flying to Europe and then backpacking for a couple of months isn't the same thing. And so that's one flight there, one flight back, and part of a plan that expands over. I mean, you might be taking the bus while you're there, or the train system. So frivolous travel is obviously something to analyze. Travel with meaning is something that you analyze even deeper and give yourself some leeway. I remember when the COP21 was happening, a lot of the typical climate deniers were, you know, having a field day counting up the carbon of everybody flying over to Paris. And I was reading the articles thinking, oh, these jerks, they're just, you know, blowing out of proportion. But when I read the numbers, I was like, okay, does everybody need to go to Paris? The number of people that are coming from the Canadian government, I was like, just send Justin Trudeau and that's good enough. You know, his entourage, and you've got like 1,000 people coming from Canada. Why is that not being analyzed? They kind of deserve a bit of that criticism.
And I think that we need to set the example too. Like I like the idea of traveling with meaning. I like that, Ray. Because it puts it into perspective. We take trips, even Suzanne and I, we try to not leave and go drive just to one place. Whenever we go out, we try to lump multiple errands or tasks into one thing, but there's still times when the convenience, there's a lot of, and it comes back to veganism too, with convenience. We've got these systems in place and they're so convenient. They're right there. They're all set up for us to just, all you need to do is plug in the credit card and you're good to go. We've made it so easy for us to not think about those things. How do we make it more difficult? And I think Greta is doing a great job conveying that message. And we need to also, you know, she can't just be the only one. We all have to get this message out there too. Like adults, not just children, and like just everybody.
Well, I think this is why we can use technology to help us, because it's our 20% that can afford can put the credit cards into the slot and buy the airline ticket. It's not the 80% that lives off of 10% of the money. They're not able to fly around and say things for the environment or speak against money, but they would if they could. And I think that developing a way on using technology on a platform would give them the ability to speak too. Then we would hear from them instead of just us. And I think it's important to hear from them. And we won't, oh, I'll stop there.
I totally agree with you. I think it's not important. It's critical. It's foundational. It's not possible to do the things that we're talking about until we decide to include everyone. And I mean, again, using a little slice of my background for, almost 4 decades, I've worked in the developmental disability system in the United States, in which the majority think that people who have cognitive disability are like a different species, and we treat them completely differently. And so we do things that are literally insane, and we spend an enormous amount of money doing it, and we keep people basically incarcerated. And it's heartbreaking, and we know how not to do it, and we refuse to do it. Excuse my dog. He's getting hungry, so I'm going to have to step away and feed him shortly. But we're doing the same thing with the 80%, or with indigenous peoples, or with anyone who isn't part of the majority, not the majority, of the moneyed, ends up being someone that does not get listened to. And that means that we lose the majority of the wisdom. And we think that we're smart. And this is so stupid and so insane that we make all these decisions based on a few people that have the majority of the pretend resource, money, because it's not a real resource. And we end up in these very, very bizarre places. And yet when we try and have this conversation, those of us having the conversation sounds like we're the nuts, right? To the majority. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who don't have any money are wanting to have the money, right? People come to the United States because they're gonna be able to do that. Oh, do you want to come talk to everyone? Is that what you're saying? Yes, okay. He doesn't feel like he gets listened to enough either, which is certainly true. We don't listen to the animals, the non-humans, both in our homes and outside our homes, nearly as well as we could. And they are all speaking to us, and we're not listening. And I don't know where I'm going with this, except that it is so delightful to talk to people who actually don't just look at you like you're nuts when you say these things.
No, you're not at all. And in fact, those two things are entirely related. The 80% and not talking to animals. Oh shit, I totally forget about that. It's in terms of systems thinking, each of these systems, like humans, animals,
humans as a system, other species, and animals as, all of us
as
together.
we ignore feedback from our environment, we in turn take away our intelligence. And included in that is ignoring the intelligence of other species. And by ignoring their intelligence, we aren't allowing their system to receive the feedback that it needs in order to thrive. This can be seen in things like specifically animal agriculture, where there's, we are separating chickens and hens and their children and calves from their mothers, and it's obviously damaging in some way, like damaging their intelligence, because they're no longer able to function in the way that they were created to, and therefore whatever other systems are tied to that, which is everything, because everything is connected, in turn becomes damaged because of it. So I think you totally had a valid point there. Yeah.
Well, I'll share another example. Ray, I was in Toronto a couple of years ago at a 5-day immersion experience with about 150 people who work on behalf of people with disability. And it's a very progressive group of people. But I facilitated a session talking about veganism and compassion to non-humans and how that is connected to the way that we treat people with disability. And it was a small group, I don't know, a dozen people, 15 people maybe showed up for this session. And we were having an interesting conversation. And then, Miles, you'll find this interesting. People brought up indigenous peoples and their use of animals and the way that they give thanks for killing the animal and then using the animal and the hide and all of those things. And it was fascinating to me how this group of people who I think they all think of themselves as being quite progressive, decided that we couldn't have the real conversation because as soon as the rights of indigenous peoples was inserted into the conversation, and by the way, there was not an indigenous person in the group. So that wasn't part of the thing, but the use that, well, as long as it's okay for them to continue killing animals and eating them and using them, then I might be able to think about reducing my consumption of meat. Like, it was this really weird thing. And I mean, sometimes those kinds of conversations become overwhelming to me because I'm trying to figure out what is really going on here. What is the conversation? And not only with the other people in the room, but with me as well. What is it that is happening that does not allow us to get to a point where we can understand things from each other's points of view and look at the entire system? When you're thinking about systems thinking and how all of this fits together, what is it that is happening? And I don't know the answer to that. I just know that it's very frustrating a lot of the time. And I keep finding these things like the money conversation that just makes it more complex.
Well, I think it makes it simple if you understand money as a poison, as though our 20%, the most, has been inflicted by a poison. Because you look at it, and we're born into this world of money, and we grow up under the perception that our survival depends on money. We don't work for a bushel of food. We work for a paycheck. We work for money so that we can buy food. Plus, we live in an artificial world that we don't live in nature. We live with electricity and everything that the money world has bought all around us. So we don't even know, most of us don't even know what phase the moon's in. We have this artificial perception that our survival depends on money, and that makes us do anything to survive from money. Even destroy nature. We sell nature for money because that's what we survive off of. Why do we do stupid things like build nuclear power plants without even knowing how to dispose of the radioactive waste? We do it because that's how we survive, because we think our survival comes from money.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that new system where we solve the money thing, because I was just talking about this morning with my wife about my mother's Scottish heritage, and she's got that every problem is around money. Is everybody employed? I was unemployed for about 2 weeks, and she was a mess. So this morning we were talking about how much would this new system just put her at ease, because if you have an ability to survive, everybody gets to survive. Everybody belongs on the planet. Everybody is allowed to survive, and we should make sure that everybody is surviving and thriving. And that's the baseline. And then what is the human race capable once you take that huge weight off of us? And I think that's the homo ahimsa that Sailesh talks about. We can't be that until we stop worrying about this survival thing that, and to be fair, it's hardwired into evolution. So evolution is survival. The biological, zoological evolution is all about survival. And we've learned how to, make it to the end of the day without getting eaten. Now we have to go to that next level and be that exceptional human race that we always thought that we are. We're kind of fighting against this human exceptionalism that we're so much better than animals. But the one thing that we can be better at animals, we haven't really expressed that yet. But that's where we're heading.
And that's what I think we should. That's exactly what I think we should do. But I don't think we can do this in the world that we live in now, because money controls our world, and we can't. We have to go to our vegan meetings and things like that, and because that's what we just can't change the world that we live in now. So, and that's what my website tries to explain. We don't try to change the world we live in now. We create a new world in the digital world. And then at some point humanity will be ready, and then we can change. When humanity is ready, if we don't have a plan ready, then we won't be able to change.
Well, I really like the idea of planning all of this out with everybody here. It's a lot of fun.
And like Miles said, I think, we all have our strengths, and we'll soon see how they all intertwine.
Just to address that thing that Anne was talking about before about the people using indigenous people as an example of why the world can't go vegan, which is more or less what they're saying. To me, it's kind of like hiding behind them. They're bringing up these cultural things that they think this works in every situation. That every time I bring up being sensitive to culture, I always get a pat on the back, and it's always the right decision. So I think that there's these moments when veganism comes up and non-vegans start to get their cognitive dissonance going. They know they don't want to harm animals. They know that there's such a thing as veganism. They know that they're resisting it. So they have this fight between the way that their ethic, what they believe, and how they actually act. So they have to reconcile this. And one way that they do is they want the conversation to come to an end. They may be engaged in the conversation, but there's this part of their mind that wants the conversation to stop. And if they throw in the cultural issues of indigenous people, then it will stop. And there's lots of really well-intentioned white environmentalists that do this on a regular basis. And it's kind of gross. I feel the need to call it out when it happens, because it's white people saying that I have this privilege of eating meat and I can continue to enjoy this privilege because I'm using this argument that indigenous people may not be able, that aren't part of the conversation, that aren't even connected to the internet. They're somehow, this vegan movement is starting in north of the Arctic Circle. No, it's not. It's starting here. It's starting with you. It's starting with me. It's starting with people in conversations. And if there are indigenous people in the conversations, over half of them are living in cities now, and that can't be ignored. If we're talking about people living lives of sustenance off the land, that's a very interesting conversation. But if that's not the conversation that's being had, it's not that interesting to me. It just seems like it comes across as an excuse.
Ray, one thing I want to say about that is we don't get a choice over what womb we're born out of. I mean, nobody gets to choose whether you're born to be an indigenous person or in the 20% or in the 80%, or even if the life you're given is even human. We don't get a choice. It's all by luck of the draw. You come into this world and you are who you are. So the only thing we have in common, as far as I can see, is we're all human. I mean, every generation changes. I think a generation is 25 years long, depending on how you determine it. But so we don't get a chance. To say that that I'm a part of the indigenous species, well, or that I'm better than you for some reason, or I have the right way, or you hurt my ancestors. Well, I didn't hurt anybody's ancestors. I didn't even get a choice. I wouldn't if I would, if I had the choice. But I can't help what happened in the past.
Yeah, I struggle with that feeling of, we didn't choose where we showed up on this earth, in what body, in what state of privilege, but we do benefit from that privilege too. So kind of balancing that, the guilt of benefiting from that privilege and knowing that you didn't choose it, but getting, having the choice of what to do with that privilege, and yeah, how do we speak out and make plans for a different world?
The thing about First Nations in Canada, and there'd be some parallels in the United States, is that in fact the repression is still going on. So in Canada, they're still on the law books what's called, or legislation that is referred to as the Indian Act. And the First Nations people in North America, if you go back to 1613, when the first Europeans landed, Indigenous people welcomed them, and they offered the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which is part of the Iroquois Confederacy. And in brief, it's a very high level of intelligence, I would say, and openness and generosity that they demonstrate in this Two-Row Wampum Treaty. And it essentially says, we welcome you, but let's agree that, you have your ship and we have our canoe, and we should live harmoniously, not interfering with each other. Now, that relationship of mutual respect really started to deteriorate. And it was primarily because of the European worldview being one of conquest and the concept of ownership and the concept of capitalism and owning livestock and such. Whereas Indigenous people, they didn't have a worldview of money, and they didn't have a worldview of owning Mother Earth. So let me just share something that I found very disturbing when I really recognized it. Ray will relate to this, but so I'm probably, with Adam, older than most everybody here. But this is my scrapbook from 1967. So I was just a kid. And I was always very proud of this until just a couple of years ago when this Truth and Reconciliation process started here in Canada. But if you look at it, it shows images depicting down here a ship landing, Europeans coming. Shows this guy hacking away at a tree chopping it down. It shows a covered wagon with settlers. It shows a fire where there's nobody here, but there are the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arriving. It shows a train, a one-room school, agriculture, trains, schools, boxes of education institutions that we're all familiar with, enter this door, and like an assembly line you go through, and after 6 years in elementary school you get pushed out the other side. But and then combine here. But what you'll see, there's no Indigenous representation at all. And it dawned on me, holy cow, yeah, we have nothing to say that we're better than, say, Nazi Germany, because it's actually recognized that what I just depicted here is evidence of the genocide. So yet individually we haven't done anything. I haven't personally caused injury or insult to First Nations people, but as Suzanne said, we've all benefited from this bulldozing over their beautiful cultures, and we owe it to ourselves to recover and that wisdom and support them as being part of the governance of these countries.
Well, I missed part of Ray's conversation because I got a phone call and stepped away for a moment. But I just wanted to add a couple of things. I see the repression and discrimination of Indigenous peoples all over the world as certainly connected to all of this, but slightly different, or at least deserving of its own conversation. In relationship to veganism and Indigenous peoples, the conversation with that group of 15 people or so, when it occurred a couple of years ago, I finally said, I am not at all concerned about the truly Indigenous people still living in concert with nature. There are so few. I mean, it's less than 1% of the human population. So the number of animals and the amount of land that people are on is minuscule. I am curious, and something else about the romanticizing of Indigenous peoples killing animals and everyone thinking that that's something that we should preserve. Like, I don't quite get that. I get that people in different parts of the world and at different times had to do it in order to survive, and then it became habit and tradition and whatever. But I'm not sure in a lot of the world, I'm not sure that that's true. And one of the points that Ray was making is most Indigenous peoples around the world who can hold on to that identity, who have not changed so much because of their communities being decimated, are living in cities or living in urban areas and are no longer living the way that they did several hundred years ago. And yes, it's wrong how we got here. And now that we're here, I don't want to support the killing of animals in any way. And I also recognize that even with the killing of animals, those people never destroyed the earth. Or at least there wasn't massive pollution. There wasn't the destruction of huge tracts of forest. People did not do that. They moved the teepees every 3 days, so the grass didn't. There was a much greater wisdom about living in concert with nature. But the bottom line is, why would I start with truly Indigenous people living the way that they have for tens of thousands of years? I wouldn't even go there. I'm not even, even in conversation, I wouldn't suggest that that's where we start. We start at McDonald's and with people who are continuing to eat meat, dairy, and eggs 3 times a day or more.
That seems to be the implication too, that when they bring it up, they're saying, we have to shut down this conversation because it's not sensitive to indigenous people. And I've been in spaces where there's a lot of environmentalists who have indigenous people as their allies in fighting pipelines. And yet I don't really understand why they would think that there's a natural partnership, that there's some sort of natural affinity between indigenous cultures and animal agriculture. There's no connection whatsoever. There's no benefit for indigenous people to have all their forests cut down. They themselves didn't have a culture that decided that putting fences around animals was a great idea. I mean, you have to go all the way to Peru, and there's a bit of farming of alpacas and llamas, mostly for their wool. But other than that, North and South America was agriculture free, animal husbandry free. So that's an entirely colonial import, and it's something that really makes vegans a better partner than meat-eating environmentalists, in my opinion. I'd like to have the conversation with indigenous people. I do not want to have the conversation with white environmentalists telling me that they're in solidarity with First Nations people and they can't go vegan because of it. I think that's, beyond the pale. I think it's cowardice. I think it's, finding some way to justify your damage to the planet and using a cultural excuse to do so.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And I don't think all cultures are equal. I think that there's an importance to really analyze our relationship with Indigenous people in Canada and other countries, because we have a lot to learn from them. They have really great cultural issues that we need desperately right now. The whole idea of making decisions based on 7 generations, how it will affect the next 7 generations. That's not a European import, for sure. That's what we can learn from. And I'm listening to, does anybody know Howard Zinn? I'm listening to an audio.
Yeah, I know Howard Zinn. I've got a book by him.
A People's History of the United States. First chapter is about Christopher Columbus.
Yes.
And he's going into Christopher Columbus's notes about arriving at the New World, and these people are swimming out, and they're so friendly, and he's analyzing their culture and says they don't have wars. Nobody goes to war for somebody else. There's no, the chieftain doesn't say, I have a problem, everybody get your weapons, we're going to war. Nobody goes to war for somebody else. They do have disputes of one person does harm to another, and that's understandable. But that concept of war doesn't even exist in their culture. And then we came in and introduced all these, great European innovations that now we have to start undoing some of those European innovations and understanding where we can learn from cultures that, have as rich a history as we do. It just wasn't as strong and as resilient to hold up to us bringing our capitalist system and showing how we turn nature into money.
I'd like to say something about that, because like what you said about Ray, about over here in the Americas, they didn't herd. They hunted the animals with respect, and they were in the agricultural age. Well, over in the European areas, that side of the world, they did herd. And so I think there was a big difference between herding and agricultural. In order to herd animals, you have to have a different mindset, because there's a big difference between hunting an animal with respect and going up to your herd and grabbing an animal out of the herd and killing it to eat it when your neighbor comes over. There's a big difference. You have to harden your heart to the animals. And that's where money was first born. So, I mean, that's where we started using money. And that's why I say money affects us like a poison, because then we came over here searching for riches, searching for the fountain of youth and for the riches from other countries. And all of our minds, we brought the culture of money over here to the United States, to the American side of the world. And now it's permeated everything.
Yeah, and I'll just, say that like right now we're in the general social club at the end of this world. And, as I've said, I'm not vegan. I don't say I'm vegan. I'm saying vegan for life kind of thing. And plant-based diet is the way for me. But I'm not hardline vegan, and neither do I conflate the injustice of the First Nations done to First Nations, which is still being corrected here, or attempts are being made to make amends for this abuse that they've suffered in Indian residential schools, and the fact that First Nations people didn't even get the vote until 1961. So I'm even older than that a little bit. But so anyway, just saying that I approach this issue of reconciliation as one of the potential radical collective intelligence columns or silos that will eventually connect with everybody else. And so the First Nations people lived harmoniously. It wasn't until the settlers came that tens of millions of bison were wiped out on the plains where I live. It was when the settlers came that the Pacific West Coast otter was wiped out along the coast of British Columbia. It was the settlers that came and created the beaver pelt industry. First Nations people they weren't poisoned, as Adam would say, by the concept of capitalism. Sure, I guess you could say that there maybe were some giant animals that died for some reason, but I did have the honor of visiting the Tsuut'ina Nation near where I live, and Akiji, which means sort of chief, Lee Crowchild, we gathered in a circular room, and he pointed up, and they had these images of animals all around the room at their school. And he just said, you don't appreciate what each of those animals means. And, I still don't, because I'm not Indigenous, but they learn, they took instruction from the animals. And in fact, Professor Leroy Littlebear, he says, always say, he encourages people always to add all of our relations. If you say grace, at your mealtime, things like that. There's a tremendous reverence and appreciation for the natural world that we trampled all over.
Yeah, I just put a link to a YouTube video though for a talk that was in the University of Toronto 4 years ago, and I've actually got I noticed I've got the notes. You can see my comment, and I've footnoted every topic in this talk because I thought it was a really important one. I've sent many people to watch it many times. It's a professor who was at University of Toronto. She's now at University of Dalhousie on the East Coast, but she's of the Mi'kmaq tribe, and she's grown up in the city and is trying to explore her cultural roots. and reconcile it with being a vegan. And she delves into the tribal myths, the storytelling of the groups, and they have very specific stories of the brotherhood of humans and the animals, and specific myths about how they have been given permission to eat of their flesh as a sign of respect. Now, a lot of vegans might say, okay, that's just their own trying to explain away why they have this brotherhood and they still also eat them. But that cultural point is there, and it's being made, and it's showing a deep respect for the animals that are being killed to be eaten. So to fast forward to present day and to live in a society that feeds you cows that lived in a horrible life, that with no brotherhood, with no sense of respect for them as family members, I doubt that there would be any sort of exemption. Well, those aren't on. You don't have cows on totem poles. They're imported from Europe. This doesn't. It doesn't feel like there's a clear reason why you would live in a society that has obvious disrespect for animals that are designed to.
Well, they have ceremony around their animals, and when they did eat them, there was ceremony and reverence about it. There's all sorts of documentation about this. So, for me, one of the questions to pose people is, why can't we take school children to the abattoirs, to the slaughterhouse? And, why isn't it that those shouldn't be conducted in such a way that we could take the elementary school children there to see where their food is coming from?
Miles, we used to do that. So my husband, it didn't happen to me. It did to my husband. He's 66 years old, so he's not that old. They actually did take the kids to the slaughterhouse, and they walked them through the slaughterhouse, and they showed them everything that happened when he was in maybe second or third grade, so 8, 9 years old. And then they fed them hot dogs and bologna at the end.
So why is that?
At the end, they had lunch. And so here's the deal about that. So we don't do it any longer because there were kids that were crying and throwing up at the end. But that was part of the indoctrination. And I think it stopped shortly after he went through it, or it was faded out. So
that's very interesting. And now we have these egg gag laws, which, if we're in a free and democratic society, why are we tolerating egg gag laws? Why aren't basically glass walls available on these slaughterhouses where people would actually see what's going on? This is part of this propaganda machine that needs to be addressed. We have to confront people, that if you're going to eat that, you should at least appreciate what happened before it got onto your plate. That's interesting.
Right, but I have to back up to something else that you said, Miles, and so this idea that indigenous peoples or any peoples have had a brotherhood with the non-human world in which they were given the approval to kill and eat those animals, and that they did so with appreciation. Well, you know what? All the human sacrifice that was done in the world was done with great ceremony and great, pomp and circumstance and gratitude to whoever it was that was being killed and sacrificed. I do not find that to be any kind of consolation to the one being killed. So if my brother came to me and said, well, you're going to be sacrificed because we need to kill you because we want to, because we need to, because of whatever, and we're really grateful that you're willing to give up your life, I don't think I'd be so happy about that. So I'm not so sure that the deer, the elk, the bison, the cow, the chicken, the fish, the whomever was in concert with that. And I find myself, you can hear it, right? My blood pressure is up. my pulse is up, because I think that that is one of the arguments to keep us in that world of violence. Because while I absolutely agree that the vast majority of practices that indigenous peoples used were for life, there were still some that were against life. And we no longer have a need. And there is no difference between saying that is a tradition that should be able to continue and the Thanksgiving turkey is a tradition that should be able to continue. Neither of them should.
It's very similar to the all parts of the animal are used argument. There's been times when somebody has told me, either in reference to First Nations people or for, some sort of idyllic kind of grass-fed, utopia, humane meat, and that all parts of the animal are used. Like that's somehow reassuring. It's certainly of no consequence to the animal that they wanted to live. That's the end of the day. But I've mentioned to one person that I've been to a slaughterhouse and I've watched them take the rendered fat and the bones from the slaughterhouse to a candy factory down the street. So all the viscera is turned into candy. I'm not that, enthused that all parts are used. We're feeding this to our children.
I think the thing about it is, again, I'm not vegan insofar as, I got a leather couch upstairs, and until I dispense with a lot of stuff, and given that I'm the only one in the family of four that is inclined to plant-based diet at this time, it's always going to be a personal choice. You'll never be able to legislate it's illegal to eat meat.
You don't have to wait for the couch to be gone, though. You could just say, never again. My next couch is not going to be leather.
Well, that's what I'm doing. Like my wife bought some leather gloves for my son. I said, well, you're going to have to, and he didn't need them afterwards. And I said, you're going to have to take those back because I'm not wearing them. So anyway, I'm inclined that way. But what I'm getting at is that even First Nations people today will get on board with the concept of plant-based diet. They'll recognize, yes, my people lived harmoniously with animals. They had prayers and thanksgiving for and ceremony around the time when they did take an animal to feed themselves. But we're in a modern world. There's 7.7 billion of us. We're just crushing the planet. So I think a lot of people who do have legitimate, real First Nations heritage would say, oh yeah, this plant-based diet makes sense for me too. But it's example and it's evidence and it's, sharing Dr. Rao's report and, getting the message about what the facts are.
Yeah, I don't think, I'm not so sure that we were ever meant to eat meat. My studies have shown me that about 12,000 years ago, a large asteroid or meteor hit the planet and destroyed, it wiped out the large animals that we used to live with. And I don't think we have any, we never studied that. We never studied life before like 12,000 years ago. And we only studied, when I went to school, I was only taught about prior civilizations. I wasn't taught about civilization or people that lived on Earth before our civilization began. So I only learned how to compare to previous civilizations, basically, that use money. But prior to 12,000 years ago, we lived with huge animals on the Earth. I mean, there was a sloth in South America that was 23 feet tall. I mean, there were camels here in America. There was a lion in America. There were bison in America that were like 14 feet long. So we lived with huge animals, and I think I'm not so sure that we ate them or not, because I think after that asteroid hit, it changed life all over the world. And after it hit, we didn't have those big animals to hunt anymore, or to live with. So it changed the way we live. And the indigenous people that lived over here in the Americas had already entered the agricultural age, because anthropologists say that over the course of the last 300,000 years or so that we've lived on Earth as Homo sapiens, we lived with an average of 10 million people or less. And so when Columbus came over to the Americas, there were already 60 million people here. And so we had already entered the agricultural age. But the Europeans, that side of the world, had entered not only the agricultural age, but they were herding animals. And they started, the herding animals, like I said, is where was the first form of money. And I think that's where it was derived from. It caused us to be more fierce. When we lived as 10 million people on the world, we were small enough numbers that people could live, and they didn't fight. They had a mindset that could live for a long time. But after the asteroid hit and things changed, and we started money, we started using money, it changed our mindsets. So we can't live a long time now because we overpopulate. It causes us to do everything that's destroyed our Earth. Anyway, that's how I think that we started using money, and how animals and eating animals has caused us to destroy our world.
I do a much quicker study than that. I look at my hand and go, is that for taking down an elk, or is that for peeling a banana? We've been primates for 63 million years, pretty much since the dinosaurs died out and mammals started to appear. Primates started to evolve, and that's what we've been doing for 63 million years. So when people say we've always eaten meat, we've, maybe 50 to 100,000 years of organized hunting. That's not a very big stretch of time. And it's certainly not enough time to rewire our plumbing. Our plumbing is designed for frugivores who eat fruit, and it hasn't been that long since we've migrated from Africa, and that eating meat kind of came with that. As we left these areas of great fertility and tried to move further and further north, we had to start killing animals and wearing their fur because we're not naturally designed to survive in those climates. If I stayed a night outdoors with my cats who like to stay out overnight, I would die of hypothermia.
And I think we don't know,
thing.
like these indigenous people here in North America, they might have had a much higher plant-based component than we think. We sort of think, they were on the plains here, just hunting buffalo and having barbecues all the time. But no, they probably were eating a lot of local plants and supplementing on occasion with buffalo. That's quite possible. They needed clothes, as you said. They needed, like the people up in the Arctic, they had to cut up a seal to make some clothes. Otherwise, as you said, they'd freeze to death. So that was the past, and we just have to look at the facts that there's now way too many of us. And as Dr. Rao so graphically illustrates with his drawings, how the cows and pigs are about the only animals left, and the wild animals are now just these little tiny circles. And it's got to be shocking to people that just in our lifetime, my lifetime, I don't know, what is it? 60% of those wild animals are gone. You know, it's just it's crashing. So, everybody's got to take a look at what they're eating and what they're wearing and what they're getting their sofas made out of. And we just got to wake up. Everybody. Doesn't matter whether you're First Nation or not.
I think we were made for two reasons. I think there's two reasons why we're on the earth. The first one is to be caretakers of the garden. And the second one is we were born with our intelligence. And I think our Mother Earth created us as a superior intelligence so that someday we would be able to protect our planet from asteroids and things from outer space that come down, and because our planet gets hit by these things much more frequently than we think, than we learn, and than most of us realize. And when a large asteroid hits, it can do a lot of damage, and it wiped out the dinosaurs. And so I think our Mother Earth I think she's kind of a living organism, and once developed us so that we could protect her. And I personally, I think that's what the pyramids are all about. But that's just my opinion. I don't have anything to substantiate that.
Adam, I want to jump in real quick. Sorry, Anne and Ray, I see you too. I want to say, or maybe propose, instead of superior intelligence, just like a unique intelligence that might allow us to do that, because superior to me still like puts us at the top of this privilege hierarchy where we, it just seems dangerous to me to use superior instead of something like unique. Because I think we need to acknowledge the intelligence of other living systems and stop trying to put ourselves on top.
And also putting ourselves on top on a basis of intelligence. We happen to be a species, one of our greatest features is the cerebral cortex, but we're terrible swimmers. Like a shark may say that we're clearly an inferior species because we can't swim very well. We don't, we don't adapt to the water. We're automatically, as thinking creatures, evaluating our world, the value of animals based on how well they think. And we have these dolphins; they're pretty smart. We like them, and we have these chimpanzees; they're pretty smart. We like them. And insects, they don't seem to think that much. So unless you really get into it and see the hive mind, and then all of a sudden you have respect for bees and you think that's cool. But we evaluate everything on how we think, and that's kind of an anthropocentric thing to do. She probably thinks the woolliest creatures are clearly the best.
Well, I'm not saying that the animals are inferior. Or that we're superior to them. I'm just saying that we have an intelligence that's capable of deflecting meteors, and they don't. And
right,
that's the only thing I'm saying.
But calling that intelligence superior is still placing humans at the top of a hierarchy that just doesn't exist. There's the intelligence of our cells.
Well, we're intelligent enough to destroy the planet and destroy all of their lives. And they're not intelligent enough to do that to us.
Well, Or
think
I would
superior
actually
is kind
say
of-
that it's our disconnection from our intelligence that's allowing us to destroy the planet.
Why are
And
we disconnected?
So getting back to the systems theory of intelligence states that every system is intelligent insofar that it can make connections with the other systems that it's related to. And in herding, we're talking about herding animals versus hunting animals. When we herd them, when we put up fences, when we steal animals from their mothers, we're disconnecting them from their feedback loop, impeding their intelligence, and then impeding our intelligence in the process, and allowing us to create this system of destruction because we're ignoring it. We're ignoring the fact that we're disconnecting the whole system of intelligence by hurting these animals. So to me, it's not about them being less intelligent. It's just about us all respecting the intelligence of all of these systems and figuring out how to let these systems live out their own intelligence.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we're less intelligent than them. We're just intelligent in our own way.
Yeah.
But what happened is, I think, is that we broke the law of life, and the law of life is that life adapts to nature. And if you think about it, all life on the earth lives by adapting to nature, except human life. And we used to live by adapting to nature, but we don't live by adapting to nature anymore since money has destroyed the way we think, I think. Now, if one species of life decided to make nature adapt to them, then that would mean all other life on Earth would have to adapt to whatever that species made nature adapt to. And that's exactly what the human species has done. We've changed nature and augmented it so that it would adapt to what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
What caused us to do that is not our fault. It's a poison that has infected us. That's why I say money is a poison. If you realize that money is a poison, it removes all the blame, because we didn't get a choice of what womb we were born out of. We didn't get a choice of what life we have. And so we blame other people, but everybody's just reacting to this poison.
Mm-hmm.
We all react to it. Why do people build nuclear power plants? Because that's how the poison makes us act. The symptoms of a poison are the end of life is the worst, and then it causes false perceptions and abnormal behaviors. And the American Psychiatric Association has said that stress from money is the #1 disease in America for the last 7 or 8 years. And that's just what they've recognized. The money is significant, and if we start envisioning a way without money, I think that's the way we can find our way out.
I was going to say about Suzanne taking the exception to the rule to the use of the word superior intelligence, and saying that there are different kinds of intelligence. That's definitely a dangerous word, because superior has been used so many times in the past to illustrate an apex from which you can designate everything that happens. Human exceptionalism is based on being superior. And biblically, I don't think it ever should have been presented that way. I think that we have a huge responsibility, not huge privilege, to do whatever we want. We are the exceptional species because squirrels aren't going to solve these problems. We're going to solve these problems, and we have the ability to measure these things. We have the science that was developed through the military, through fighting, through all these horrible things that we've done to each other. Yet these
Science.
systems come out of it. We're talking on the internet, which was developed for the military, and this is all something that we had to do. Apparently, is to be this vile creature that destroys the earth and destroys each other and subverts the animals and causes massive species extinction. But Celestia's story is kind of fascinating. Working in that narrative about the early Anthropocene, that we have unwittingly been doing something good by doing something bad. All the bad agriculture that we've done for 8,000 years has been putting carbon into the atmosphere. And today we say, okay, well, putting carbon in the atmosphere is a bad thing, but it was a good thing. It actually leveled for the first time in hundreds of thousands of years our climate, so that we could do agriculture. We did agriculture and we continue to do agriculture because we leveled the climate, which typically goes up and down. Every scientist is fascinated with this plateau of stable environment that just happens to coincide with the birth of agriculture. So, I mean, I could see the hand of God in that. This is, or the that hand of evolution that is so complex that it's greater than we can understand. Life finds a way, and this is a big complex machine that we're now part of. And this is the good news, that we're part of it rather than this unnatural thing that is just here to destroy everything. And I think that's a message that's so important for so many people, because my wife included, and she's just, I'm done with the human race. I don't want to hear anything about human problems. We're a horrible species, and we all have to go away now so that the other animals can survive. So I kind of have to talk her back from the precipice every once in a while. But a lot of people, as we encounter this, we just say the human race is so horrible. But I think this is the moment of truth. We live in interesting times where all these things are coming to a head, and we get to witness it. I think that's something that I could find a lot of motivation and excitement to be contributing to it. Otherwise, I'd be sitting around going, what am I supposed to do with my life? Now I've got a clear path. There's an obvious problem here that needs to be fixed.
I think the agriculture is not necessarily a good thing at all. I mean,
well, neither is war, but war was one of the things that allowed us to have this internet thing, which has been able to bind so many people together. So it's such a nuanced, mass of different pros and cons, and every single technology has its pros and cons.
But it's not really
the governments want to try to control the internet. We may have more freedom of information and get the knowledge to share that the mainstream media won't.
I'm just saying that agriculture causes human populations to rise.
Yeah.
And when human populations rise, that creates competition. Competition creates fierceness.
Oh, and the Haber-Bosch process was this great thing that they got Nobel prizes for being able to improve agriculture and expand our population. The side effect was a huge population growth.
You're right,
and working out for us.
And we changed.
Everything
we put all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere,
yeah.
and it changed. What we did was we tried to make nature adapt to us, and then by doing that, what we're doing is we're not smart enough to make nature adapt to us, even by agriculture, because when we start increasing our populations, that means we're making nature adapt to us by agriculture. And that means instead of living in our small numbers of 10 million or less, where we lived in warm climates and people didn't know what naked was. I mean, humans are the only creature on earth that recognizes nakedness. And so when we started agriculture, we're essentially trying to steer our own planet. We have no idea what makes we just live on Earth. We just live, but the Earth is, lets us live here. And when we start controlling, doing things like that change the structure or the chemical makeup of our atmosphere and stuff, we start making nature adapt to us, then we have no idea what the ramifications of that will be later on.
Well, that's the cheeky thing about that story of the early Anthropocene is we thought we were doing something that was really bad, and nature was actually in control. Nature was saying, "Yeah, burn down those forests. We actually need that to increase our biodiversity." The human race for 10,000 years increased biodiversity. We're ruining it now, no question about it. But in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, over 200,000 years of ice ages, we have canceled an ice age.
Yeah, but
we
was
have done
that wise?
Because
maybe the Earth needs the ice ages. Maybe the Earth needs the ice ages.
Yeah,
in order to be balanced.
This is what Silas is saying with the. So he's taken the early Anthropocene hypothesis and made it into the thermostat species hypothesis. We've never been in control. We've been trying to grow our food, and we invented this thing called agriculture, and it was at first glance a mess. We've created deserts because of our bad practices, but turned out we needed deserts. Nature knew that, we didn't. And now that we think that we're so clever, hopefully we can turn that cleverness into realizing that for the first time in a very long time, the human race is in danger of extinction. Can we turn it around? Or are we just going to be, binging on Netflix while we go off the end of the cliff?
Yeah. So I have to say, I agree with your wife and Suzanne that the human race is not the most intelligent or have superior intelligence or perhaps has any amount of actual intelligence. There's no other species that has done the kind of damage that we have done. And it's a great story that nature wanted us to do these things, but I think it's another story. I think that is another story. And it might make some people feel really good about working toward a solution. And I think we do need to work toward a solution. But I got to say, I think the idea that Mother Nature created humans in order to save herself was a massive failure, clearly. Thankfully, there are some people who seem to be understanding that, and we're going to try and have an impact. But I can't get on board with we needed war because we got the internet. Well, my understanding is when we were gatherers, we were working 3 or 4 hours a day gathering food, and the rest of the time we were telling stories and having a good time. We didn't need the internet. We only need the internet now because we have so many people. And the fact that the internet was created for war, I mean, that just hurts my head. It hurts my head. Wars are bad, no doubt about it. So I can't quite get on board with that.
Well, you're trying to break it into a melodrama of good and evil. I think that nature is much more complex than that.
Oh, interesting.
What are the tools that you're going to use to fix the world? Like, what are the tools that we're going to use? If you can find any that didn't start with technology that was derived from the military, I don't know what it is.
Oh my God, Ray!
We don't even know that there's a crisis. You only know that there's a crisis, that the carbon in the atmosphere is high because science told you. That's technology. That's human intelligence. So that's something that, like I said, squirrels aren't going to solve this crisis because they don't know about it. They don't have the tools to measure it.
But squirrels didn't make it. Squirrels didn't make the crisis. People did. So if there hadn't been people to begin with, there wouldn't be all these problems. But anyway, you were going to make, this is why I love this group.
This is true.
Because you will make me think about those things. But your argument that squirrels aren't going to solve it is correct, because squirrels didn't create it. People did.
But that notion that there's also a greater onus on us as people living in a developed nation, little villages in Africa didn't create this problem either. So our initiative has to be
Absolutely
much more, and you see that in the environmental communities where they want all the nations to come to an agreement. India said, look, you've created this crisis. Your Western developed civilizations created this. Change your consumption habits, and then we'll talk. You know, right. So
yeah, absolutely. Right.
Well, I'd just like to add that I think the going to plant-based diet, because I'm not ready to say I'm vegan, because that's like claiming an identity, and I'm sort of to the point now where my only identity is my name. But Dr. Rao, to me, really has it figured out. I know Jamin's really big on the solar radiation management, but if we need 3 million square miles of thin filmed reflectivity, that means you'd have to get 3 million miles of road and go out for 1 mile with the potato chip bags. And, James is going to watch this on the replay, but I just have a hard time figuring that one out. Because it's like, how would you create all this thin film and maintain it? It's going to get, I know, engineering wise, you can make it fairly long lasting. But anyway, Dr. Rao it's all about, quit eating meat and let's get reforestation happening. And I think people just don't understand how much deforestation has occurred over the last, 10,000 years since we went to industrial animal agriculture. And it's just pretty straightforward. So I'm all for plant-based eating.
Well, I'm glad you brought up SRM, Miles. I did feel like we should talk about it, and since Jamin is absent and he is so passionate about it, and we talked about a lot of drawdown solutions here, and we didn't talk about cooling the planet today. So I struggle with that, because I'm on the vegan train. I'm on Silas Rao and let's reforest the planet and stop these monocrops for animals that we're going to kill. And Jamin's argument is convincing that we need to act fast to act on cooling too. So, the Vegan Collective Intelligence meeting is starting in 45 minutes, and I'm going to need some food at some point. I don't want to cut the conversation short, but I am glad that we did come back around to SRM in the end. And
yeah, I'm pretty well ready to wrap up too. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This has been wonderful. I'm glad we were able to continue the meetings, and thanks for showing up.
And Adam has to get going. All right. Yeah. Well, any final comments?
I just want to say I am on board with SRM as well. I think it's one of those bigger things that we can do that I was not aware of. And I'm really happy that there is such a thing. And again, I'm really grateful to this group for having this conversation and allowing us to get into it on kind of a deep level, or a deeper level than I generally get to do with other people. I do it in my head all the time and with books, but it's nice to do it with live humans. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask everybody to please give me your email addresses so I can send you, links and stuff that I'm working on, and I'm really not in conflict with Jamin and what he's doing. It's the same thing, only in a little different way.
Yep.
And
so I have one question about the email thing, and this might be really stupid, but we're being recorded. It's going to be put on YouTube. It's going to be out there. Is anyone concerned about putting their email address in the comments, or Or am I just being silly about that?
You can put it in the
would
chat.
like
The chat's not is not put on YouTube.
Oh, cool.
I don't
Cool.
know.
Okay.
And
Excellent. Thank you.
yeah, there's a way to send, instead of chatting to everyone, I think you could chat individually to Adam too, potentially.
It's a definitely a concern, and
Thank you.
so I'm gonna make sure that the chat doesn't show up
For this
for
one.
this particular.
But-
Yeah,
I
thank
mean-
you. I just did it privately, Adam, because I want to get your stuff. I was just like, do I really want that? And I don't know. I might be just being silly because I just might be being silly. But anyway, I sent it individually, Adam.
Right on.
Show up, can it?
No, it doesn't show up. I've never seen it show up.
Not in a video.
Nope, not on.
Save the chat, but then you.
Cool. Yeah, I've got the ability to export the chat. So, Adam, if you put your email address down, I'll
He
make.
did already.
Okay, you already did. So yeah, I'll make sure you get the chat with everybody's email address in it. And in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up.
Right on. Thank you. Now put my email down here right now.
Perfect. Just want to say thank you to everybody, and look forward to the next meeting. And
Everyone's welcome back at 3 if you can make it.
I'm going to be the meeting details are on Basecamp, and if you haven't gotten the invitation yet, actually let me know and I can invite you
If you want it.
if you want to be in the meeting at 3 o'clock.
Thanks, everyone.
Don't hang up. Hang on. Don't hang up yet. I can't write down these numbers fast enough.
This used to mean peace, but now it means vegan.